you really got to learn, what are your limits? What are your strengths? What are your weaknesses? Start being just a little uncomfortable and working your way up from there and, design your life the way you want it.
Are you looking for true personal freedom? The freedom to design a life you truly desire? Then you're absolutely in the right place. True personal freedom comes from when you take 100% responsibility and control of your money and your mind. Here, you're going to learn ideas, tips, and wisdom that's going to help you bridge the gap from where you are now to your dream life in the future. My name is Randy Wilson, and welcome to the RichMind Podcast. All right, everybody. Welcome back to the RichMind Podcast. And today, I'm bringing to you another fantastic guest. I'm super excited about this conversation. I'm bringing with you John Rickgarn. John is from Marshall, Minnesota. And we're going to find out where Marshall, Minnesota. I know probably most of us know where Minneapolis is or something like that, right? Minneapolis, St. Paul, but I think Marshall is something different from that. So we're talking about Marshall, Minnesota. He's an investor. He's an educator. He's a realtor. And he helps the average person build multiple diverse streams of passive income. And oh yeah, by the way, pay less in taxes. I love that part. We're always trying to look for ways to pay less in taxes. He's a fellow podcaster. I was actually on his podcast a month or two ago, maybe earlier this year.
March, I think it was.
Yeah,
if I remember
March,
it.
which was a fun conversation that we had back then. So I'm super excited to have him on today. His podcast is the Wealth and Freedom Nexus podcast, and we'll give him an opportunity to talk about that here in just a little while. But for now, John, welcome to the show.
Hey, thanks for having me on, Randy. It's great to be here.
Yeah, as I mentioned, we met. It's hard to believe it's been 2 years ago.
No kidding.
In the wonderful country of Belize, right, in a real estate guys event. But for those listening that don't know much about you, right, give us a little bit of color. Tell us a little bit about John and where you're at, where you're from. I told everybody Marshall, Minnesota, but yeah, a little bit more about yourself.
All right. Well, yeah, I can probably start with Marshall. Not a lot of people have heard of it. I joke of, hey, it's the founding place of Schwann's Ice Cream and Red Baron Pizza, with Schwann's shared services started by Marvin Schwann's many, many years ago. That usually gets people's attention. I still kind of remember 20 years ago, I was actually visiting some friends in Indiana, and Roy was like, Marshall, why does that name sound familiar? And not 30 seconds later, a Schwann's truck drove up right in front of their house with Marshall, Minnesota. I was like, that's where I've heard it from.
Yeah.
But that logistically, I always just tell people, because 9 times out of 10, they're like, oh, you're by St. Paul or Minneapolis. Like, no, that's about a 3-hour drive. I'm about 60 miles from the South Dakota border, 60 miles from the Iowa border for logistics. My general background, and like you alluded to, going back, I actually did the quote unquote traditional path, go to school, get good grades, or try to get good grades, maybe, get a job, work hard, get benefits, save for retirement, yada, yada, yada. And 2014 was really kind of my epiphany or wake up moment, I guess, where I was 31 years old. And there's a bigger story behind that. But basically, remember sitting on my couch. It was November of 2014. And I just thought, I'm 31 years old. If I was to essentially relive my entire life, and obviously we don't remember when we're 6 months old, obviously, but relive my entire life. And during that time, working 40, 50, 60 hours a week, still would not be at the arbitrary retirement age of 65. I'd be 62 then. And then it just kind of dawned on me. It's like, well, what's to say I'm going to make it that long? My backstory, I kind of coined the hashtag do not defer your life, where my parents passed away in their 50s of cancer. My dad, when I was 11, my mom was 16. So just did the traditional path, just kind of woke up. It was like, what's the point of working this hard, deferring everything in life for an arbitrary date that isn't even guaranteed going to be there? So that's when I started my path of, there's got to be something else out there. And then I did a deep dive into podcasts just like this one, books like I see on your back shelf, Rich Dad, Poor Dad. I've read that numerous times. And then just kind of started working on building additional streams of income, and then also wanting to share and educate others what I did, my work for them, and even just learn from my mistakes. So like, hey, instead of wasting your time, 3 years doing investment X, this is my experience, go do something else.
That's fantastic. And I don't know if I knew this, and if I did, I apologize for not acknowledging it earlier. As far as your parents, we've got a similar story with that background. Were you aware of that we have that connection?
I was not, no.
Both of my parents, that was kind of my awakening as well. Well,
Okay.
I've lost both of my parents to cancer as well. My mom was a month before she turned 50, and my dad was 6 months before he was supposed to, quote unquote, retire, the age that we're talking about, of 65. He was just turning 65.
Jeez.
And so those were big epiphany wake-up calls for me as well. So I didn't realize that was part of your background and your story as well. So that's I'm sorry for that, right? That loss, I can completely sympathize with that. So, but that's interesting that's part of both of our backgrounds and our stories.
Yeah, that lovely C word has definitely impacted a lot of people. And I always kind of chuckle when I hear financial advisors like, oh, do X, Y, A, B, C, D. And when you get to age 65, then you can live your best life. And like, they should probably change that talk track to if you make it to 65. I'm guessing they lose a fair amount of clients doing that.
I think so too, which is why I'm super excited to dive into this conversation, because the amount of wisdom you gained through the readings, through the coachings, through the teachings, through the events, through all that stuff, right? That's the whole idea, is bring it and educate, right, folks, to realize that there is a different way. There is a potentially better way. Not maybe necessarily one's good or bad, but at the same time, there's definitely a different way that if folks become aware of it, then they can potentially take a different path, which is exactly what we've done, for sure.
Exactly. So
for sure. So let's dive into the 3 questions. I shared these with you yesterday. And so hopefully you'll be prepared. I'm sure you are.
I read them, I think, 10:30 last night before I went to bed. So hopefully they're still in my mind.
They're not too tough, but just there again, to get everybody a little bit more of an insight into who you are and how you think and how you operate. But the first one is, who's had the biggest and greatest influence on your life?
I could probably come up with a laundry list of that, but if I had to pick one, it would probably be my Uncle Ralph. It was actually my dad's brother. He kind of became a second dad to me and just had a lot of wisdom, was very, how do I put it, just kind of cool, calm, relaxed for everything. Like even when he got diagnosed with cancer, he was just like, okay, I mean, life happens. What do I do now? What are next steps? I mean, he didn't get, angry about it or upset. I mean, it was just, I guess, kind of roll with the punches. And I always liked talking to him, where he was very, very much an independent thinker. He was could kind of really see both sides of a coin, if you will. Like Rich Dad Poor Dad always says, there's 2 sides and then the edge. Whether it was politics or social issues or social norms. Even he was while he was a college professor, he really, how do I put this, really kind of stressed the obstacles for a lot of people in college and acknowledged college isn't for everyone. He said this as a college professor. Sometimes the stress gets so hard. He actually wrote a book, Perspectives on College Student Suicide, where there was a huge spike in suicides, just of, the pressure, whether it was, financial, mental, from parents, where they're like, you got to get an A, you got to become a doctor, you got to do this. And he really kind of said, yes, for some, college might be the best years of their life, but some it's the worst, and sometimes it takes a toll. So I still struggle with that. I try to be very open-minded, where, okay, I might firmly believe in this side of the issue, but let's try to listen to the other side and, gain some perspective. So again, at age 40, I still struggle with that, but I kind of look at where he was able to do that. It's like, well, maybe I can just, glean some wisdom from him and look at both sides of everything.
It's challenging to do that. I try to do that myself. One thing that I talk about and I share with my kids or anybody else I talk to about this type of thing, as far as being aware of or paying attention to people that are certain about a particular topic, right? That it's 100% has to be this way. That is, I've learned through my years of experience that when you come across folks that are certain about something like that, to the point where they're willing almost to die for their ideas
Yeah.
or beliefs, that's like, that's where you need to kind of just step aside. It's like that three sides of
Yeah.
the coin, like you talked about, right? Heads, tails, and
Yeah.
the edge. It sounds like your uncle was this for you, as far as giving you the ability to kind of think through that a little bit differently.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And there, like I said, we had numerous conversations over the years, and, a lot of memories, and just where he was, like I said, just kind of very cool, calm, relaxed, regardless of what, life threw his ways, where right, wrong, or different, I tend to get my dad's temperament, might, lose my temper or blow my handle from time to time. And he was the exact opposite. So it's like, well, there might be some genetics in play that I can't overcome.
That's cool. Sounds like a very good influence on you. So that's
Yeah.
awesome. So moving on to question number 2, what has been the biggest challenge of your life, and what have you learned from that, John?
Well, I'm actually going to take a sidestep, and I can think of 2 moments in my life. So I would say the first biggest challenge was when my mom passed away at age 6, or when I was 16. I was born an only child. So at that point, not to discredit my dad or anything, but it's like when he passed away when I was 11, it was kind of a blessing. We weren't at the hospital months and months on end. It's like, all right, I still got my mom. Life is quote unquote normal. Don't have to worry about, treatments or medicine or, up the wazoo. So it was sad, but it wasn't as life changing. But then when my mom passed away, it's like, okay, well, I'm an only child. Now what do I do? And long story short, there's a family in my hometown of Slayton, Minnesota, even smaller than Marshall, just to the south of here. They took me in as one of their own. And looking back, it's like, okay, it was definitely a very struggle. It was a big struggle at that time. But then with that, then became a uncle, had nieces and nephews, became a brother. So it was like really opened up to a larger family, I guess you'd say. So yes, it was the biggest challenge in my life, but yet looking back, it's like, wow, I wonder where I'd be now if it wasn't for that moment in my life, so to speak.
So you were able to, did you consider them as your family then? I mean,
Yeah, definitely. Yeah.
yeah.
Yep. Yeah. And it was kind of funny. My youngest niece, Jade, she was 3 when I moved in. So she actually doesn't have any memories of when I wasn't around. I just was always Uncle John. I was always there and whatnot. And kind of looking back, it's like, okay, now I feel old because now she has a daughter that just turned 3, which is the same age as when I moved. Like, okay, I'm old now. But, it's kind of a funny backstory. And just obviously, like I said, a larger family got introduced to what's available versus, just being an only child.
Yeah, for sure.
So
You said there was possibly 2. Did you have another one there?
yeah, so there's a second one. So with my my backstory, before I got into real estate investing, etc., I spent 12 years selling copiers and printers. So I was on the road a lot, sold a lot of technology products, and had a number of good years where I made 6 figures or close to 6 figures. And the last company I worked for, we were part of an acquisition. They were employee owned, so they're an ESOP or stock ownership plan. So and every year it's like, yep, you earned X, here's the profit share, here's how much the shares are worth now. Just seeing that balance go up and up, hearing of others that had 6 and even 7 figures in their account, it's like, oh man, this is it. I'm home. I'm going to be here till I quote unquote retire. I'm just going to have this big bucket of money and whatnot. And I'll still never forget the day I was driving east on 212, delivering a machine for one of my customers, Citizens Alliance Bank, when our service tech Norb called me up and it's like, yeah, did you hear the news from the video? I'm like, well, no, I've been on the road all day. I'm not going to pull up a video on my phone and whatnot. He's like, oh yeah, it's from the CEO. They sold the company. So then the ESOP went away. They sold to a private equity company, which, if you know anything about private equity, if they can squeeze blood from a penny, they will do that and then some. And by comparison, so with the ESOP, and then in conjunction with how they changed the commission plans from 2015 to 2016, my compensation got cut in half. And then also had the higher stress, just micromanaging up the wazoo. It was just kind of insane of what was required at some times, and stuck it out for another, 4 years at that point. I left in 2019. But while that was a big challenge, that was a big, rug pulled out from under me. Thought, okay, I envisioned this huge ESOP balance of 7 figures, retiring. That's gone, not coming back. But if it wasn't for that extra push to, get me into entrepreneurship, real estate investing, calling my own shots, if it wasn't for that, I probably still would be working 60 hours a week, have more gray hair than I have now, and probably be pretty unhealthy and miserable at the time. So, it's just, I kind of bring up those two moments where obviously for different perspectives were the worst moment of my life, but in a sense, I think there's always like a silver lining, or, there's always good aspects that you can look at where they were defining moments and really changed my life in the end for the better.
That part of your story resonates with mine similarly as well, meaning private equity took over.
Yep.
I was in retail, and
Yep.
private equity came in and bought the company I was working for, and I had intended to retire there as well. I mean, I
Yep.
had no intentions to move on. I worked a lot, but
Yep.
I didn't have, I was okay with that, right? Meaning I enjoyed the work, as much as you can enjoy your job, right? I actually enjoyed
Yep.
what I did. And private equity came in and, like you said, stripped it
Oh, yeah.
and just squeezed every nickel that they could get out of it. Ended
Yep.
up closing my store, which,
Ugh.
if anybody's heard my story, I won't get into it today because it's about you today, John. But at the same time, yeah, that was exactly how it went for me as well. It was a huge wake-up call, thinking that your life is going this one direction, and then it's just almost like a complete
Yeah.
180, right?
Yeah.
And you've got to
Slamming into a
pivot.
brick wall pretty much.
Yeah, 100%. So that's part of your story resonates with me 100% as
Wow.
well. That's fascinating. I didn't know that about yourself as well. So moving on then to the third question, and I love getting into this third question because it kind of, and you've already touched on a few things, back in your childhood, that's definitely had a big impact on your life and even in your early working career. But if you could go back to I always say 20-year-old self, but I mean that let's say the teenage to early
Sure.
20-year-old self that you now, right? You mentioned that you're in your 40s, you've got a young son now, and just life, right? You've learned a lot. Is there anything you wish you would have known back then or wish you could share with yourself back then that you know now that you would have definitely changed?
I think probably the biggest thing I wish I could have done is, and I mean, when we're teenagers, we always do stupid things, but if I could talk to myself of just really honing in of, hey, younger John, just remember, your parents didn't make it to retirement age. So not to make it sound morbid, but it isn't guaranteed you're going to make it to that. And while I probably wouldn't have talked myself of working, not working as many hours as I did at Sam Super Value, delivering papers, mowing lawns, all the side hustles I did, of, hey, there's this thing called passive income where if you put your money to the side, and whether it's a stock, a book royalty, real estate investment, whatever, having additional passive income streams versus just active income streams really is the way to get more time freedom and more financial freedom. So that'd probably be the biggest thing I'd hone in on my younger self, even though at that time I'd probably be like, what's a stock? What's a real estate investment? Hang on, I got to go download some stuff on Napster. You leave me alone.
100%. So at this time of this recording, we're getting ready actually for the new school year to be kicking back up, right? I'm seeing posts of friends with kids in college age years. My kids are actually a little bit beyond that stage, but at the same time, that 20s-ish time frame. Can you think of like a resource, or I know you educate, right, with your podcast and what you try to do. We've talked about how we have gone the turnkey model with the real estate investing, right? Maybe we can talk a little bit about that. But is there any type of, if someone comes to you and says, John, okay, I hear what you're saying, but what do I do? Where do I get started? Is there anything that you usually start with folks with to learn a little bit more about what to do with the passive income versus the active income part of life?
Usually the biggest thing is I first say, educate yourself and find out like what really resonates with you. And, then usually the next topic comes up is like, okay, how or where do I start? And, whether it's a turnkey, especially now at the time of this recording, we have, rising interest rates, more of 7% versus, 3-4% like you and I when we bought our properties. A little bit more of a challenge, but then I just look at it's like start to think creatively. And I always started doing this kind of financial freedom one bill at a time. So I always take this one a little more granular, if you will. So a lot of quote unquote gurus say, oh, 5,000 a month, 10,000 a month, $15,000 a month. That's your number. That's the number of passive income or whatever the number is. And for myself included, and I think a lot of people, they're just, well, that's just a huge hurdle. That's more than I make at my W-2 job. That's just insurmountable. I'm not even going to try doing that. So I try to look at, can we break this down farther? And I always joke, right, wrong, or indifferent, regardless of the state of the economy, everyone seems to have a Netflix subscription. I can't give up Netflix. I can't miss Orange is the New Black or whatever the new series is. All right, so that's, let's just say $15 a month. Can you find a passive income stream that pays you $15 a month? And then that pays that one bill. And once you have that set up, it's like, okay, that's one bill in my life that's paid for by passive income. What's the next one I can do? And then you kind of work yourself up from there. Over the years, I've invested in, stocks that pay dividends. I've done platforms like Realty Mogul and Fundrise that pay either monthly or quarterly distributions. I invested in trust deeds through Ignite Funding, where a little bit higher barrier to entry, but they have a minimum investment of $10,000, which might be a lot for some, but it isn't like 50,000 or 100,000 for like some syndications. So I just kind of always bring that up. It's just work backwards. What are your set monthly bills? Yes, let's take a little bit of the Dave Ramsey approach. Are there some that you can eliminate? Do you need a Hulu, a Disney Plus, an ESPN, an HBO Max, a Paramount, et cetera? All these subscriptions, can we cut some of those back? But once we have it down to, no, these are kind of the base set monthly subscriptions or payments I have every single month. Okay, now we have that. Work it backwards where you find a passive income stream to pay off every single bill. And, it sometimes starts small, but then can definitely snowball from there.
Yeah. So I talk about that, right? So once again, the certainty that Dave Ramsey's 100% wrong, or, the rich dad, poor dad, the real estate guy, whatever. It's almost like a blend, right? You almost need to have, especially at the beginning, because that's what I did, right? You'd start eliminating all the waste.
Yeah.
I call it waste, right? All the things that aren't necessarily serving you, cut that, get as lean as you possibly can with your expenses, right? And then just start bolting on different streams of income. And you mentioned a few there. And then some of those I wasn't even familiar with, that I'm going to have to pick your brain after this again. And maybe you can fill me in on some of these other streams, right? But you then start bolting on, right? And little by little, slowly but surely, you're going to get to this freedom number that gives you the option. It's almost like an option. You can keep working or you don't have to. And that's when the fun part of doing things that you choose to do versus being told what to do, being in control of your expenses versus your expenses being in control of you, for sure.
Yeah. Well, and I even look at that too, where you mentioned Dave Ramsey, and I know you and I are, similar wavelengths where, Dave just looks at all debts is bad and there's no such thing as good debt, live debt free, et cetera, et cetera. I joke it's pretty much impossible to do that now, considering every dollar bill has Federal Reserve note written on it, but that's a discussion for another day. But, not all debt is bad. There's definitely good debt. I just look at it of, okay, yes, I'm taking out debt at whatever, 5, 6, 10%. And yes, there's interest associated with that. But can you take that or take those proceeds from the debt, put in a turnkey investment, a syndication, whatever, earn 10, 12, 15% or more. And then you have the concept of arbitrage. You're borrowing at whatever, 5%, you're investing at 10%, you're making a 5% spread. In that context, when you're asked how much debt should you have, the answer should be as much as you can get. So I know Dave's very much, eliminate all debt, but, debt does have its advantages. And again, kind of going back to where my uncle tried to teach me of just, no one's 100% right on everything. Try to look at both sides. And even from there, see what works out best for you. I know I think one person put it, don't remember verbatim, but it was basically, if you look at Dave Ramsey, his views on debt is like a recovering alcoholic on alcohol. So yes, it might just be one drink or one beer or one wine, but that could spiral out of control. So yes, I can see some instances where people have no financial education, no self-restraint, whatever. Okay, maybe in your particular instance, that makes sense. Likewise, Robert Kiyosaki, Ken McElroy, and other people and others we've met and, talked to, like you said, back in Belize, them getting $100 million loan for a multifamily property, I mean, that would give me a stroke, but for them, it's just business as usual. So, you really got to learn, what are your limits? What are your strengths? What are your weaknesses? Start being just a little uncomfortable and working your way up from there, and, design your life the way you want it.
100%. So folks, that last little chunk there, that was gold. And I want to kind of revert back. I want to put the rewind on there. I want to tie into one word that you mentioned, right? Because that was the word that was going off in my mind, which was arbitrage.
Mm-hmm.
And that's something that, for me personally, I didn't know what that was or what that meant when I was first in my experience of learning investing, how to make money versus earning money, which is something that I talk about, right? So it's the idea of using the tool, debt as a tool.
Yep.
Borrow the tool to put it into an investment that has utility, that's going to spit out a higher return than what you borrowed at. That is arbitrage. So you used the simple example of borrowing. I mean, rates are different these days, right?
Yeah, I just gave us quick numbers.
Yeah, simple math. I mean, if you can borrow at 5 and invest in something that's going to give you a 10% return, that 5% is your profit. That's you are making, quote unquote, making money at that point.
Yeah.
And like you said, when you can find something that will do that day in and day out, it's like, how much do you want? And it's like, as much as you'll give me.
Exactly.
And I'll never forget the first time I ever heard Russell Gray go through that was kind of when the light bulb went off for myself, when he was explaining that. And hopefully and you did a great job. And hopefully with that little bit of a context there as well, will help some folks that are listening. But the idea that if you can take an investment, take a tool at a certain percentage rate, even if it's a high percentage rate, if you can get above that gap, that spread, that's your profit, right? And that's where the beginning of where you can start building some freedom and some wealth in your life.
Exactly. Well, you mentioned in my intro where I introduced myself as an investor. Obviously, I've been investing in various alternative assets for almost a decade now, and the traditional ones for over 2 decades now. I educate people on what I've learned, but I'm also wear a realtor hat, where it's nice to have the MLS listings. I don't need to bug an agent of, hey, give me info on this property, this property, this property, this search, etc. But I try to set myself apart from all the other agents, in the area, and I'd even say nationwide, where not a lot of agents themselves invest in real estate. Not a lot of them understand all the nuances and tax benefits. They're more of, oh, you're looking for a 2,000 square foot home, 4-bed, 3-bath, within a mile of a good school district, and 1970s build, or whatever their criteria is. They're like, okay, okay, here you go. I try to bring it up. It's like, hey, did you know if you can't afford a big down payment for a house, which a lot of people are struggling with, there's a thing called FHA. There's, if you're a veteran, there's VA benefits, as low as 0% down. And they still might look at, it's like, well, yeah, but rates are 7%, and then my monthly payment's X, and I think I might just keep renting, et cetera. It's like, well, what if you got a duplex with an FHA loan, 3.5% down, you live in one side, rent the other. Now you're subsidizing essentially, or your tenant is subsidizing your mortgage payment. Fast forward a year or two, then you decide to, do equity stripping, as Russell Gray always talks about, refinance the unit you lived in, you move, put in a tenant. Now you have 2 cash flowing units in your portfolio. Maybe you rinse and repeat. Maybe you get a single family home for yourself. Then maybe you get another duplex, or a lot of people don't know this, but with FHA and VA loans, you can get up to 4plexes and live in one unit, rent out the other 3. And by that point, you might actually be living rent free while your tenants pay your mortgage. So it's just kind of those creative nuances that I'm surprised not a lot of agents and even investors don't know about. And granted, myself, I didn't know about that years ago. I wish I did when I bought our house back in 2006, but that's, I can't go back in time.
Yeah, 100%. So it's a matter of just understanding that that's even a possibility, or that's even an option, is been when I have conversations with folks, it's like they don't even realize that that's even an option, really, as far
Right.
as like the thought process. We haven't been taught those things. And if we haven't had the influences, like you mentioned about your uncle or even family members that have kind of shared that with us as we've gotten older, we kind of just go through the motions of, okay, I'm supposed to, like you said, go to school,
Yeah.
get my job, raise my family, buy my house, live in my house, keep my job until I'm quote unquote 65, all of those things that we've been fed that I'm not saying they're right. I'm not saying they're wrong. I'm just saying that there's options, right?
Yeah.
And once you learn the options, you can then
Yeah.
make those choices, right? So it's a matter of just learning what those are. So if folks are coming to you, and like I mentioned, my kids are in their 20s, right? And they're trying to figure this out for themselves. They're currently renting. They're stacking capital, right? But with the
Sure.
ideas of the FHA, because of the things I've learned, right? We're having these conversations about the different options that they've got for investments and that type of thing. Is there anything you mentioned about the FHA options? Is there anything else like that in terms of real estate? Just maybe the normal folks, the folks that are just kind of going through the motions, that maybe you're kind of setting off some alarm bells in their head. Okay, maybe I need to check
Sure.
that out. Is there programs and stuff that like that can help for sure?
Yeah, there's like I mentioned, the FHA and VA are probably two of the most popular. And I bring them up because in the finance world, a fourplex, you and I and probably anyone's going to say, oh, well, that's multifamily, it's more than one unit, where technically in the banking world, 5 or above for units is considered commercial, 4 and under single family. It's a little bit of a paradox in my opinion, but at the end of the day, you can get a nice 30-year fixed relatively low interest rate loan on a up to a 4-unit complex, live in one unit, rent out the other 3. Like I mentioned before, we are in a rising rate environment, and there's some buyers that are a little scared of the mortgage payments of 7% interest versus 4%. Some are kind of on the sidelines. Sellers, on the other hand, are like, well, I like to move, but I don't want to get rid of my 2.875% interest rate or anything like that. But there's other avenues as well. A lot of people are still surprised that last I checked, over a third of the homes in the nation are actually fully paid off. There's no mortgages, there's no liens or anything. So what if you're able to do a seller financing? Maybe an elderly couple, they're looking at selling. Maybe they would be exempt from capital gains, but maybe they've been there so long that they would be subject to some capital gains. They could set up a seller-backed or seller financing, called a contract for deed. Here in Minnesota, it's called other variants in other states, where you're basically paying the seller's acting the bank, and versus getting, here's a lump sum of, take your pick, $500,000. I'm going to pay you a monthly payment of X, and that can be structured however you want. That can be principal only, that can be lower interest. Again, it kind of comes back to educating both the seller and the buyer, where the seller might be like, oh, I want as much interest as I can. Okay, do you understand interest is taxed at your highest marginal tax rate? What are your other avenue streams? Is this going to be taxed at 30%? Or do you want to structure where you're getting more principal only in a bigger balloon payment? Do we need to structure it differently of, okay, we have up to $500,000 that is exempt from capital gains. You're sitting on a, let's just say, $550,000 gain. That $50,000 would be subject to capital gains tax. Do we want to spread that out so the tax, maybe not gone away, but it's spread out over a number of years, and maybe even keep it under your standard deduction to make it truly tax-free? And again, I know I'm kind of rambling. I'm not if anyone from the SEC is listening, I'm not a financial advisor. I'm not a CPA. I'm not a CHLU or any of those other acronyms. This is just stuff I've learned over the last 10 years where I like sharing with others. Is like, there are a lot of options out there to get into real estate, get the benefits of real estate, and certainly more options than just getting a traditional loan or buying, a single family first-time home buyer building.
Yeah. So folks, if you can't tell, John is full of wisdom in the terms of real estate, right? So you
well,
are
full
right?
of something, at least my wife will
it's
say.
Great. It's great stuff. And I'm digging it, right? But because you're speaking my language, you're speaking down the path that I've gone down to teach myself these things. And the point that I wanted to try to make is that getting folks like you on their team, right? Just be successful in real estate or any type of business, because real estate is nothing more than a business.
Right.
That to get the right people on the bus or on your team is crucial. And having someone with the knowledge and the experience that you've got, John, is going to be exponentially greater at the end of the day than trying to figure all this out on your own. And that's one thing that I've learned of myself, right? Is that when I've always tried to go on my own, I've either messed it up and gone backwards, or else it's taken 500 times longer than it should have. Than if I just would have called the right person. It's like you're talking about the seller financing. Sometimes that can get a little wonky in your head as far as like, how do I do that? What do I do? Right. But if you've got someone that you can call or to be in communications with and saying, okay, here's what I have. Here's what the seller's willing to do. We almost did that, or we were in the process. My wife and I were looking at a wedding venue space or an event space, and the owners were looking at seller financing. We were going through that process back and forth with the negotiations, but I was taking that information and I was bouncing it off of somebody else that was helping me figure out the negotiation points. Right. My point is that had I not had that person on my side, we would not have been able to have a high level conversation to be able to determine if it was going to be a good deal or a bad deal for both of us. So that teammate or that team aspect of investing, I think, is crucially important. And would you agree with that?
No, I agree. Yeah. And like I said, there's the old adage, there's no I in the word team. And I think we need to surround ourselves people that are smarter than us. And like I mentioned, a few things. I picked up a number of golden nuggets on taxes and estate planning, et cetera. But at the same token, we hire a CPA firm to do all our taxes and give us some feedback of, hey, if you do ABC or, another tangent I can go on. We meet at usually around November of each year, where we kind of look at the numbers, and long story short, it's here's how much you have in your AGI. Here's how much you have in depreciation. You are $10,000 below the $125,000 level to get full depreciation, offset your W-2. So you can do a conversion of $8,950 of your traditional IRA to your Roth IRA without paying any taxes. And again, I just went down another rabbit hole on that base. But again, it comes back to a team where I don't have to sit through and become a CPA or become an accountant. I don't have to go to law school and learn everything about trust and deeds and everything. I have an attorney that I, contract on, does, helps with the LLCs, the filing, et cetera, where, again, you're kind of outsourcing some of the, I don't want to say trivial stuff, but stuff that I'm not an expert in to someone that is an expert. And, more than one mind's working together is going to be better than just a single mind working together.
100%. So part of that tax strategy or those tax ideas is, once again, I didn't realize this, but when you're a W-2 employee, then taking their tax money before you even see a dime of it, right?
Yeah.
Versus once you step onto this entrepreneurial side and this investing side, you're in control. You get to decide where your dollars go to, right? You get your income from whatever investment you're in, whether it's real estate, your business, other investments that you mentioned, right? You get your dollars, and then you decide based on feedback from your teammates, from your CPAs, from your lawyers, from your different folks, right? Your real estate agents. Then you decide where to allocate your funds to try to minimize those taxes. As I mentioned in the beginning part of your bio, right? That's kind of your thing, is you love folks, trying to help folks try to minimize that tax burden.
Yeah. And
that's the difference.
It's probably should specify legally reduce your taxes, not pull a Wesley Snipes and wear an orange jumpsuit and making big rocks turn to little rocks or anything like that.
we at RichMind and then with Wealth and Freedom Nexus, we are 100% about legality, right? We're doing everything above board. We're doing everything legal, but we're doing it through folks that have the credentials, right? Have the experience and have the educations to go and do this legally. Yes, we're speaking, but it's one thing that if you're not digging into it and trying to learn about it, it's just not mainstream with folks who even understand and comprehend what that is. So it's like the Fannie and Freddie. So we're throwing around a lot of terms here, folks, and so bear with us, and I'm going to try to explain this as best I can. So the Fannie and Freddie are loan terms, right? The government-backed loans that an individual has the ability to get up to 10 loans from Fannie and Freddie. So when you talk about single family, 1 through 4 units, right? Is that correct? 1 through 4, or is it 1 through 5?
1 through 4. Once you hit 5, then it's commercial. Yeah.
So 1 through 4, you can borrow up to up to 10 separate individual properties through Fannie and Freddie, which is I would say the most best, they're going to, if that's the right word or not, as far as the rates are going to be the most favorable for those Fannie and Freddie loans, right? When you step up into the commercial, the 5 or more units, that you can think of different apartment buildings and things of that sort. That's a totally different world that I'm familiar with, and you might be as well, John. But that's probably, well, like you said, that's probably a conversation for another day. But I just wanted to kind of drive home the idea that folks of realizing that you can get more than one loan on individual real estate, single units up to 4 units. And then as you pass those expenses on to your tenants, right, they're paying down your loans. That's where wealth can be built, and it can be built relatively quickly, right? We've talked about it. We've gone down the turnkey route, which we've offloaded we don't fix and flip personally. At least I don't.
I don't either.
But I know guys and gals that do. And so that we've gone along and invested with them to then, there again, that arbitrage. We'll borrow at a certain amount. We'll get a return from the investment property, and that spread. Not only do we get tax benefits, but we make a profit at the end of the day too. And that's where the magic starts to really happen. And
exactly.
So I just wanted to bring up that idea of the Fannie and Freddie loans and the up to 10 loans per individual. So if you're a married spouse, if you do them individually, you can get 10 each. So up to 20. That's information that when I was first starting to learn this, that was blowing my mind. I couldn't even fathom that was even a possibility.
Yeah, well, and then he was just taking it one step further, like I mentioned before, the single family. And I haven't done this. I personally don't know anyone that has, but in theory, taking that concept, you're married, filing jointly. Okay, there's 10 loans from you, 10 loans of your spouse. So you think 20 properties. But back to Fannie, Freddie, quote, single family, they count up to 4 units. In theory, you could get up to 80 doors or 20 fourplexes, have 80 doors paying you, say, a net cash flow, $100, $200 a month. That might be your freedom number right there. And all the properties are locked in for 30-year fixed. The payments are outsourced to your tenants. I'm sure you and I could both share stories of rates during our individual lifetimes, but it's like, rates go up. Okay, I'm still locked in. Rates go down. Hey, I might be able to refinance, lower my payment, pull out some money, whatever. But the biggest thing is having that 30-year fixed payment versus, like you said, commercial might be 30-year amortization or 20-year amortization, but it has a balloon payment in 5 years. And at the time of this recording, we're hearing more and more syndicators where like, oh, I'll just refinance when the note comes due in 5 years, and oh, I'm at 4%, 8.5. Wait, the math isn't working here.
Yeah, 100%. 100%. So that's where talking about if you've got a place to put that capital that's going to get you that arbitrage, that spread, it's like, how much do you want? It's like, you want as much as you can get. My brother works actually in the banking business or banking industry, and he doesn't quite understand the conversation you and I are having today, which it's fun kind of poking him a little bit with some information. And I'm like, he's like, you want more? I was like, yes, can I get some more money? Yeah. Cause I know exactly where to put it to make this arbitrage, to go out there and just keep building it, right? Keep building it.
Exactly.
So I appreciate all that wisdom, John. And hopefully the folks that are listening will get a ton of wisdom from that part of the conversation. But let's switch gears. Let's talk about the Wealth and Freedom Nexus. As far as it's like a passion project for you, right? As you can tell, folks, John is like a wealth of knowledge. And when we met and he was like pouring into me as far as what he was doing and how he's doing it, but you've gone off and now you're trying to like educate others, right? And you're having conversations with folks, doing things at a very high level. Talk to us a little bit about your podcast and your education that you're trying to provide for others.
Yeah. So, basically, so my brainchild, if you will, this was early 2020, I started the Wealth and Freedom Nexus website. And that's kind of a mouthful if you're trying to write that down. Just go to my last name, richgarn.com. It redirects you right to it. So it's a little bit easier. But there I share a number, my story, like I've shared on this podcast, links to resources, build that up every single year, but everything from tax strategies to investment opportunities that, hey, if you don't have 10, 20, $50,000 to invest, here's an option to start with $50 or $100. The big thing is just get started. And then from there, it kind of took off Started my Wealth and Freedom Nexus podcast in, November of 2021. Like you mentioned, you were on that. Bringing on numerous topics, asset protection, passive income stream. And I came up with a name that, because a lot of people are like, well, where'd you come up with Wealth and Freedom Nexus? Going down the rabbit hole when you're trying to find a domain name of, what's available, and okay, someone's got this banked for $15,000 and I'm not paying $50,000. So it's kind of a guessing game, like, hey, this domain's available. But I looked at it where I know a lot of people that are very wealthy. They're very high income earners, whether they're an attorney, a doctor, a sole proprietor, and they have a lot of money coming in their lives, or they have a lot. But the second they stop working, they don't have that. It's like a hard stop. And in order to keep that going, they still need to work 40, 50, 60 hours a week. They don't really have freedom, but they have wealth. Likewise, I look back, and I'm sure you can relate when you were a kid, or when we were kids, go to school, and then you got 3 months in the summer. You don't have bills. You don't have a lot of responsibilities. You really have a lot of freedom. You can hop on a bike, go to a friend's house, do whatever you want for the 3 months or nights and weekends. But we didn't have a lot of money, didn't have a lot of wealth at that time. I look at it where, the Nexus is a connecting point of wealth and freedom. The only way to truly get that is to have passive income. Like I say to my, it's actually my friend that does the voiceover, equity doesn't pay the bills, retirement savings don't pay you now. And I don't care what job you have, what side hustles you do, or work 2-3 jobs. There's only 24 hours in a day. You are limited to 24 hours in a day, but there's no limit to how many passive income streams you can have and what you can set up. So my goal with the podcast was try to narrow down all the information I gleaned over the last, coming up on a decade now, what worked, what didn't. I'm still learning. I come across numerous topics every day, every week. In fact, I got one dropping, I think end of August, maybe early September, somewhere in there. Subscribe so you don't miss it. But it's a topic on how you can lease and make a passive income stream on your precious metals if you have gold and silver. And I didn't even know that existed. So I'm far from an expert. I just learned about it as well. So while I'm educating others, I'm learning as well. And then one final note on that, right now it's a YouTube only show, but I'll be releasing this in podcast format as I hashtag Screw the W2 show, which you've been on as well, Randy, where I kind of coined that phrase where, the W2, it's the most restrictive, the highest tax. And where I look at the Wealth and Freedom Nexus as more of the educational piece, I thought the Screw the W2 is more of the inspirational piece, talking to entrepreneurs, investors, what were their challenges? What was it like to make that leap to become a business owner and hopefully inspire others? It's like, I'm tired of this job. I'm tired of running on the hamster wheel. I'm going to go full bore into whatever it is I want to do with my life.
And it all starts with education, right? You mentioned
exactly
that more than once, right? It's been about a decade for you, and it's been about that long for me as well. About 2007 and 8, when the last time around was going around for the economy, is about when I got my light bulb moment. So yeah, it's an ever evolving thing, right? To learn. Yep. It's like the gold and silver. We didn't even touch base with that. That's something that I'm super passionate about. Maybe that's a discussion we can have. If I'd love to have you back on, maybe we can get into more details about that as well. Sure. But that's, understanding what the difference between real money versus paper notes, right? You mentioned that earlier, as far as the Federal Reserve note. Folks, if you take any dollar bill that you have, doesn't matter the denomination, and look at it, it's a Federal Reserve note. And if you learn what that means that paper is debt. Yeah. We won't get into that today. We're towards the end of this conversation, but I just wanted to throw that out there as well. Those are the conversations when you get yourselves in the room, when you tie yourselves and get connected with folks like John. We mentioned Russell Gray a few times on this podcast, and the real estate guys. Yeah, I learned a lot of my information from them. So the Real Estate Guys radio show, it's a podcast. Subscribe to them as well. You will learn. It's almost like drinking from a fire hose at the beginning, and I get that. Right? Even this conversation was maybe that way for some folks as well. But the point is that once you start putting the dots together, the pieces, right? It's just puzzle pieces, learning what different terms mean. It's like, there again, understanding that the word note on your paper dollar bills represents debt.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't know that. No one
Yep.
ever told me that. But that's very important to know when it comes to understanding wealth in currency and money.
Mm-hmm.
So, John, yeah, I knew that this conversation was going to be a lot of fun. We could go on and on and on. You made reference a few times to your podcast, but I just want to open up the floor one more time. Can you tell everybody a little bit more as far as where they can learn more from you and where they connect with you? What are the best
Sure.
places to do that?
So, like I said, the easiest way, just go to rickgarn.com. That goes to right my website, my podcast, my YouTube channel, my resources. I'm constantly updating that every single year, and currently have a laundry list of updates to go to my webmaster. So maybe by the time this drops, those updates will be up. Search for my name. Last little interesting tidbit: there's only three Rickgarns in the entire world, so I'm not hard to find on Facebook, LinkedIn. I'm not a John Smith or anything like that. Right, wrong, or indifferent, I'm not too hard to find.
I love that. That's where I'm learning so much even about you that I didn't know, John. I mean, I felt like I knew you pretty well, but as far as your parents' experience, which was very similar to mine, your work experience, which is very similar to mine, and then Rickgarn, 3 in the world. Is that what you just said? 3 in the world.
Yeah, it's longest story that I can, or shortest way I can condense that. My great-grandfather immigrated from Germany, changed his name. They think it was originally like Richtgarn or Richtgarten or something. Didn't share much about his family. It sounded like they didn't leave on the best terms. Came to the U.S., married my great grandmother, had my grandpa, only child, Henry, and then he had 3 kids. My dad, my uncle Ralph, and then my aunt Marge. Marge never had kids. Ralph had an only child, the daughter, so obviously the name changes. And then my mom and dad had me. I was born an only child. My parents passed away. My aunt and uncle passed away. My aunt Marge is still alive, but obviously she had her name changed. So yeah, it's just myself, my wife, and my son Ronald now.
Yeah, I was going to say Ronald is the next son, right? So at least it'll continue on at least one more generation. Yeah, that's super
exactly.
Cool. I didn't realize that as well. Awesome. I appreciate you sharing that too. That's a pretty cool way to wrap up the episode today. So folks, go out there, and the one thing that I really pound the table on as far as when I talk with folks here on the podcast is get yourself educated. And it doesn't have to be hard. It doesn't have to be, like I said, your feeling of drinking from a fire hose. I get that at the beginning, but once you learn some basic concepts, get yourself around some really smart people. That's been the best part. The experience that I've had as well is that you can ask as many questions as you want, and those folks will answer them until you get it, right? They will go over, and they're more than welcome to share anything they can to help you understand the different things that we're talking about here on this episode today. So go out there, follow John, rickgarn.com. I love that. 3 in the world. I love that.
Nice having John. Unique name. And then you can find me on Twitter. You can find me I'm more active on YouTube and Instagram, but I tweet some things. And maybe one last final thing, I only have about 2,300 followers, but Dave Ramsey took it upon himself to block me on Twitter, actually. So
I didn't know that either. That's awesome.
So
anyway,
I don't know what exactly I did, but
help John get above 2,300. Let's push for 3,000, right? So go out
Sounds
there,
good.
follow John, rickgarn.com, get yourself educated, work towards getting some freedom in your life. And it all comes with financial education. Start there. And hopefully you found some value in this episode today. So go out there, make it a fantastic day. And until the next episode, folks, bye now. Thank you for joining me on the RichMind Podcast. I hope you found a ton of value in this episode. If so, I'd really appreciate a 5-star review, and you can also share it with your family and friends. And as my mentor Jim Rohn shared with me, in order to have more, you must first become more. And in order to become more, you must work harder on yourself than you do on your job. So go out there today and work harder on yourself to become more and build the life of your dreams. Until next time, my friends.